Welcome to the Unmuted Podcast. It's another episode where we talk about all things HR, talent, HR tech, world of work. So my name is Jeff. I'm the host of the podcast, also founder of Scale HR. And we've been dropping new episodes every week. The episodes live on our website at GoScaleHR.com and also on our YouTube channel. So the channel's been growing. So thank you, for all those people that have been, subscribing, liking, adding comments. So we want to hear from you because obviously these episodes are, provide great insights from people, about North America, HR leaders, recruitment leaders, practitioners, tech, enthusiasts, and so once again, like the videos and try to engage. So this is a good one. This one is called The Accommodated Journey, Ensuring Success in the First 90 Days and Beyond. And so when we say that, that means, hiring people. And then obviously for the first, 90 days, 3 months of their, employment experience is obviously one that, is wanting to be a really positive one to continue the great experience that you provided during the hiring process. And so so this is all about workplace accommodations. So actually accommodating both candidates and also employees as well. And so I'm going to bring in my guest Kate Kalcevich soon, but I just want to make just a couple of points on this topic. First one is we have more and more people in our society that are identifying as having a disability. So whether they're visible or invisible. I mean, mine is visible, hard of hearing, obviously, so I wear hearing aids. But there are a lot of people out there that that are in your organization that are actually dealing with something that is temporary or permanent disability, and you won't actually know a lot of them also because they're actually invisible. And I always use the analogy of the iceberg in the water. So most of the disabilities fall below the waterline, so then you don't actually see them or notice them, whereas a smaller percentage of them are actually visible, and that's the actual iceberg that is above the water. So it's really interesting. I think there's been a lot more commentary and attention, being given to this community of people with disabilities, and so it's probably more than 20-25% of your workforce. So it's a really interesting concept. There's about 1.3 billion people on planet Earth that have a disability, and we're the largest, the minority group, but we're also very diverse, obviously. Different races, different sexual orientation, genders, like intersectionality, and so on. So it's complicated, and I've been in HR for almost 25 years, and so I think this is a great way to segue into bringing in our guest, Kate Kalcevich. So Kate, I just want to welcome you to the Unmuted Podcast.
Thank you. You and I have such a great history going back, getting to know you through Scale HR and your Rethinking Disabilities, which was such a great event.
Yeah, and then you also spoke last year at the first Rethinking Disabilities Conference, which was in Toronto, and then you led a really, interesting session on AI, which was, quite good. And so we're going to be redoing that conference again this year, November 28th in Toronto, and it's going to be at 111, which is downtown, and then we're going to be expanding it next year in 2026 into different cities in Canada. So I'm kind of excited about that. But so let's dive into our questions that I have for you. So the first question is before we dive into our topic, if you can tell our audience what you do, what your background is, and then what kind of work you are doing currently.
Sure. My job title is Head of Accessibility Innovation, and I work for a company called Fable. And we help large organizations make their digital products, so their websites and their mobile apps, or anything else that might be available online, accessible to people with disabilities. And we do this in a way that's unique. It's less focused on compliance and more focused on the experiences of people with disabilities. So we have a large community of people who use assistive technology. And assistive technologies are any kind of hardware or software that allows people to interact with their computer in a different way, to provide the accommodations that they need in order to interact with the computer. So that's my current role. My background is I actually worked for government for a very long time, 2 decades in provincial and federal government before I joined Fable. And in that work, I always focused on digital accessibility, but I was also an advocate for accommodation. So I myself am disabled. I have the same disability as you. I wear hearing aids as well. And so I rely on things like captions. And sometimes it's just a matter of asking people to repeat themselves in real life in a meeting when there are no captions, back in the old days, before everybody went online. And then I have experiences just hiring and managing and leading people with disabilities, especially a lot of those invisible disabilities that you mentioned, like neurodivergent or, things that aren't obvious and that people might not disclose or feel comfortable disclosing. So I feel like I've got this interesting range of experience where there's what I do for work, and then there's this thing that I'm very passionate about as an individual, just from my own experiences.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, the one thing, that I was really impressed with when I first met you was your background, which is a very, diverse background, but obviously, with the way that technology has kind of exploded in the last 4 years, 5 years, with online, AI, video, and then other, assistive technologies, that both of us use. And I think it's been fantastic. And I've spent a lot of my time educating my peers about closed caption, transcription, video, not video, mobile, web, and I think it's been great. So obviously, when we're talking about the employee journey, there's obviously excuse me, there's different stages, there's different parts to it. Obviously, the very first one is around hiring, and so when someone's an actual job candidate, and then there's after you get hired, and then there's sort of like a period of where you're ramping up, and I always call it an engagement. And then there's usually a period where you may transition to, what I call attention. And so you're looking at, what can I do next in the organization? So, those are sort of the high level areas. But my question to you is, what are the points of the employee journey where you can, look at actual accommodation?
Yeah, I think it actually starts even before hiring, because there are some things you're going to have to do before you even post a job in order to ensure that you're going to get the accommodations that somebody needs during the hiring process. So that can be things like making sure your job ad has inclusive language and that you're not filtering people out unnecessarily. We know a lot of people with disabilities sometimes have barriers to access to education, to employment. They're underemployed or unemployed more frequently. So you can see gaps in work experience or things that won't necessarily stop somebody from being able to do a job, but things that we sometimes filter out. And so we're unknowingly filtering out people with disabilities. And then there's things like, if your job ad is being posted online, is it being posted in an accessible format on an accessible website? So there's all these things that you need to think about so that you're not actually putting up barriers for people to even apply. So there's the pre-hiring, and then there's the hiring itself, where, often companies have this offer of accommodation in their job ad and in those interactions with people who are hiring. But one of the things I see is this, sometimes there's just failure to deliver on an accommodation. So you might have a policy of inclusive hiring, and you might offer to make an accommodation, and a candidate will ask for an accommodation. sometimes even being told they will get that accommodation, and then show up at the interview and not have that accommodation in place. And this usually stems from not having a clear accountability, like who's actually in charge of delivering that accommodation. So you might have multiple people, from like a recruiter to the hiring manager or other folks, and making sure that somebody's actually accountable for delivering on that accommodation request is key.
So that's a really good point, because I think, obviously it's one thing just to say something, to say that we will actually accommodate you, and then go as far as actually asking somebody, do you need any special accommodation? But the other part, that I've always been, so interested in, is that when the recruiter or hiring manager, you ask the candidate, and the candidate does say, yes, I need, A, B, and C. Is it sometimes a function of the organization just doesn't know? They don't know what to do. Like, because I've seen that happen many times before, where they say thank you, and they don't actually, deliver, because they don't know what to do, and they don't really have anybody to ask. They don't feel comfortable asking the candidate, for more information. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and that's part of the pre-hiring, making sure that if you're going to be asked for accommodations, that you have the capacity and like somebody allocated to figure it out. But to your point, it's a really great point that people are often not comfortable asking, and we need to be comfortable having conversations about disability, as opposed to avoiding it and then being exclusionary of people with disability because we're afraid to ask. And I think HR professionals have a pretty good understanding, because they have to, of what is and isn't appropriate to ask around disability. We're not asking about private medical information here. What we're asking about is what their needs are in order to participate in this hiring process. And if somebody asks for sign language and you're not certain how to get sign language, ultimately, I think it's up to the employer to figure that out, but I'd rather have an employer reach out to the candidate and say, do you have a preferred methodology for sign language interpretation, rather than not actually deliver on it.
Yeah. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with the organization asking the candidate. Normally, so most people have always told me during my 24-year career that, well, I don't want to ask questions because I don't want to offend anyone, or I don't want to ask, the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. And I'm like, no. If you're coming from a place of you're being authentic and real and, curious about it, then, but it's coming from a positive place. And so they need to feel comfortable, asking that question. What would be your, suggestion to hiring managers, recruiters, if they're stuck and they don't know what to do, and they've asked the candidate, but the candidate's like, well, I don't really want to answer, and what do you do? How do you manage that?
I mean, if you have an employee resource group, lots of large organizations do, with a focus on disability, that can be a good resource. There's also government resources available out there. So whether it's, the federal or provincial government, there's a lot of information available to employers. I'm in Ontario, Toronto, Ontario. So I know the Ontario government, which is where I used to work, has a lot of information about how to comply with their accessibility legislation. So just on ontario.ca, and being able to look that up. And just find resources there. The internet is a wealth of information. And, just a simple search, if you're looking for sign language interpretation, I'm sure it'll pop up. There are things like the video relay service. I'm just focusing on sign language because that tends to be one area that I know really well. But even if it's things like adaptive technology, there's the CNIB who helps with people who are blind, low vision. They have a center where they help people get access to that technology. So there are organizations like that who can also put you in touch with the right supports.
Yeah, obviously there's many different types of disabilities, and there's different levels of severity. I work obviously in them, so it's almost impossible for anyone to be an expert in all of the different types, and then how to handle them, and then how to accommodate. So I think one of the questions that I get quite a bit is where can I go to even look at it, like get information. And I think one of the things about government, as you mentioned, is, and I do agree with you, government does have good sources, but trying to find it is hard. So maybe we can, solve that problem. We'll, provide everybody with some links that they can go to. You talked about, so obviously post hiring. So once the employee becomes an employee, are there things that the employer can do to make sure that the employee experience is theoretically as positive as the candidate experience?
Yeah, and I think it's so important to make sure that, like, if somebody needs a technology accommodation, that is available on day one. But that's the other thing that I've seen is sometimes an accommodation will take weeks or months to arrive. And that can set the brand new employee up for not a great experience, not being able to jump into their work right away, or needing somebody to help them with everything. And I understand, things aren't perfect. Sometimes it takes a while to figure things out. But if you're thinking about that well in advance, it should be possible to get those things set up in time for that day one. And there can be things like having flexible accommodations where maybe if that new employee has all the technology they need, maybe they can work from home until you get that technology in the office. And in fact, that is one of the most common accommodations that people with disability need, that idea of flex work, either being able to work from home full-time or part-time. There's so much overhead and stress in commuting and traveling and being in a space with other people where you can't control the lighting, the temperature, the noise level, the physical access to the building, which sometimes isn't even in control of the employer if you're renting. I have worked at organizations where they're renting their office space, so they can't install a accessible door opener. So making sure that you're in constant communication with that employee prior to the hire so that you can either get them what they need or put them in a situation where they already have what they need.
Yeah, I think it's perfect answer. I think it's really being proactive instead of asking questions, because the worst thing in the world is to hire someone awesome and then they're not getting the actual accommodation so that they can do their best work and actually feel like part of the team. That would be, no worse feeling than being left out. So I think that's an excellent one. You talked about technology. So I know that this is sort of an open-ended question, but what are you seeing in the space right now for technology when it comes to actually accommodating people? I know it's a general question because there's a million things, but maybe just focus on just a couple of more common use cases.
Yeah, and I mean, there's things to think about, like hardware accommodations and software accommodation, but we'll stick with like the software side of things, because I think that's where some of the easier accommodations come from. So sometimes it can be simple as different applications. For example, people with neurodivergence, maybe ADHD, sometimes need tools to help them focus. It could be something like a spell checker. Perhaps one of the new ones that has AI built in that can generate suggestions, or it could just be access to an AI chatbot so that they can generate text. Somebody who's neurodivergent can spend a really long time trying to craft a perfect email and doing a lot of spell checking and reading it over and over, and giving them access to the AI tool to do that first draft for them can save so much time.
Yeah, no, I think it. I mean, obviously, from my perspective, I'm not, being hard of hearing. I mean, video technology, closed caption transcription has been a godsend to me. I mean, it really has. And I remember, the old days being in a meeting room, a table, and struggling just to see people's faces around the room. But now we've got the phone. I can live transcribe on my phone, which is still not perfect, but at least it helps me fill in the gaps. So for me, the mobile, device has been, absolutely phenomenal. But I'm only one person out of, millions, billions. So it's, but I think the technology nowadays, there is probably virtually no excuse for any organization to, actually accommodate the people, because the software solutions out there are, very, very cost effective. And most of them can be built into, regular work software, Microsoft, Google, and, uh, uh, other applications like Slack as well. So, that, I think you just have to, inquire and just ask
Yeah.
questions. And those,
One of the things that does make it a challenge with the technology is often an organizational policy. So some, especially larger organizations, will try to standardize all of their IT and all their software, and that can be a barrier, right? So organizations need to think about, if they have a goal of being inclusive and diverse, like what are the policies that you might have in place that are actually in conflict with that goal. And so a standardization of IT could be in conflict with that goal.
You're absolutely right on that one. I mean, I think, and so when I, been part of HR teams and led HR, I always, policies are fine, but I always make sure that there's something in there that says, you know, uh, we have a right to sort of change the policy, or flex away from it, based on circumstances, right? So, just because it's written down doesn't mean that it's sort of hard, wired. And so I think, people need to be very, very flexible about that. And I totally agree with you on that. And so just coming up to our time, what, just sort of a last question. Um, how do you deal with a situation where the employee may not know that they actually need, some kind of accommodation? I mean, say the manager notices something, or, the recruiter, notices something, whatever it is. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, and I've had that experience a number of times in my career where either people, they don't feel comfortable disclosing, or they don't even have like an official diagnosis. But if you've worked with people with disabilities, and you're attentive and you understand the needs of people with disabilities, and you can recognize certain behavioral signs, it becomes easier. And I understand that that's challenging for most people, but what it boils down to is having a sense of curiosity and not always jumping to the conclusion that a performance issue is related to some sort of fault on the employee side. And like really drilling into like, why wasn't something done on time, or why wasn't it done to the quality, like, and not in a judgmental way. It's about being able to have uh, conversations in a way that are just like open, curious, and you're working with the employee to uncover the root cause. And if you can do that with sensitivity and with tact, you can often come to the conclusion that, oh, this was, a lack of accommodation, and not actually, just somebody not doing the work. And, it becomes hard for organizations sometimes because they're, everything's fast paced, and, you're as a manager, middle management especially, tend to be the most stressed in an organization. And that idea of slowing down, having curiosity, and paying attention rather than just jumping to like, what is the correction that we need for this performance issue, like really understanding where it came from. You can come to some interesting findings that way. And as an organization, you also should be able to provide an accommodation without proof of disability. That's something I feel really strongly about, because not everybody has, like I said, a formal diagnosis. That can be really hard to get, especially if you have multiple disabilities, or like complex conditions, or it's a new and evolving disability.
Yeah.
Or, like there are a lot of conditions like ADHD, autism. If you're an adult, you're almost never going to be diagnosed. If you weren't diagnosed as a kid, you're not going to get diagnosed as an adult. It's very unlikely.
Right.
So that ability to say that like an accommodation doesn't always have to be something that requires a doctor to say this person needs it. In fact, the person who knows best what they need is often the employee, and if not, it's the employee and the manager together collaboratively.
Yeah, I think that's the best case scenario. If viewers can take away just one thing that you talked about in this podcast, what would be that one thing?
I guess the one thing I didn't touch on is all the benefits of hiring people with disabilities.
I probably should have asked you that too. But anyway, go ahead, Jeff. There you go.
When people have challenges in their day-to-day life, because we live in a world that's not fully accessible, you become a creative problem solver. You have a different perspective on the world. That kind of diversity, creativity, innovation, and just having people who are different on teams, it makes a team more robust and stronger. And I find those people with disabilities in an organization often become the carriers of culture for the rest of the organization. So there's so many positives to it that let's not just think of it as, oh, it's hard to accommodate, but if we do the work to accommodate, we get so much in return.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I've done lots of talks and workshops and seminars on, instead of focusing on what we can't do, focus on what we can do, which is usually quite different, and it's actually sort of in line with what your core values are, anyways. And so, let's focus on that. So I think that a great segue into, thanking you very much for being here. I appreciate your time and sharing your expertise. What that. So once again, Unmuted Podcast, all things HR tech, world of work, talent, everything, and new episodes are dropped every week on Thursday normally. And we so the episodes live on our website, GoScaleHR.com, and on our YouTube channel. So share your comments, share your thoughts. Kate, thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me. I love talking with you, and I love talking about accommodation.